The Bible does not state that Solomon lost his salvation. It does indicate that he died at an earlier age than his father David. That confirms what the Bible teaches about God chastising his children. Now, I will ask you, what makes you say that Judas lost his salvation? You are implying that he was saved. Show me scripturally that Judas was saved.
Judas was carefully selected by Jesus. He was one of the disciples. He was also one of the apostles. Judas was sent to preach and perform miracles such as healing the sick, raising the dead, and casting out demons. Also, Psalm 41 states that Judas was Jesus' close friend. It is unreasonable to say that Judas was chosen by Jesus, made an apostle, given spiritual authority, and be Jesus' close friend, and that he was not saved.
Okay.
Hold on, John. Give me a few more moments. There is more. John 13 verses 10 and 11 state that Jesus said to him, "He who has bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean, and you are clean, but not all of you." For he knew the one who was betraying him. For this reason he said, "Not all of you are clean." Eternal secularists used this text as proof that Judas was not saved, but this verse says nothing about Judas not being initially saved. This text does not indicate that Judas was never clean.
That is quite a bit of material there, Dave. I'll try to cover as much as I can recall of what you stated. It is conceded that Judas was chosen as one of the disciples by Jesus. We can refer back to what I stated about King Saul concerning God choosing someone. Choosing someone does not qualify him as saved. The question one has to ask is, chosen for what? In Romans 9 God states that he chose Pharaoh to show his power on Pharaoh. Does that mean that Pharaoh was saved? No. Was Judas perhaps chosen to fulfill prophecy? Has he perhaps chosen to play the role that he played? Psalm 109 verses 5 through 8 are a prophecy concerning Judas. In verse 6 we read, "Set thou a wicked man over him, and let Satan stand at his right hand." Judas is not referred to as a believer. Nothing is mentioned about him being righteous and then becoming wicked. He is already called a wicked man in the Old Testament. Matthew 7 verses 15 through 23 state that there are false prophets who preach, perform miracles, and cast out demons and are not saved. 2 Corinthians 11 verses 13 through 15 states that there are false apostles and that Satan has ministers that appear as ministers of light. The only way to know who they are is by their fruit according to Matthew 7. Judas may have appeared to be like the other disciples, but he was exposed by the fruit that he bore. As far as Judas being a friend of Jesus does not qualify him as saved. In Matthew 26 verse 50, after Satan entered Judas and he sold Jesus, and in the very moment that he was identifying him for the guards to take Jesus prisoner, Jesus called him friend. Does that mean that unrepentant Judas was saved? As for what you stated about Jesus washing his disciples' feet, he who is bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean, and you are clean, but not all of you. For he knew the one who was betraying him. For this reason he said, "Not all of you are clean." You stated that the verse does not say that Judas was never clean. I'll tell you what else it does not state. It does not state that Judas was ever clean. Neither does it state that Judas became unclean. If the verse stated that Judas became unclean, then you would have a valid argument. For all I know, Judas was unclean right from the start. John 6 verse 64 states that Jesus knew from the beginning who they were that believed not, and who should betray him.
Okay, John, your last statement does not include Judas and those who did not believe from the beginning. There are two groups in that verse. Those who did not believe are plural. Who should betray him is singular.
Interesting. If that is the case, my question is, does that of necessity exclude Judas from the group of those who did not believe from the beginning? The possibilities are these. Judas could have been in the group of unbelievers of that verse and not the one who would betray Jesus. But we know that is not true. Another possibility is that Judas was not in the group of unbelievers and not the one who would betray Jesus. We also know that to not be true. That leaves us with two more possibilities. Judas was not in the group of those who did not believe from the beginning but would betray Jesus. Or, Judas was in the group of those who did not believe from the beginning and he would also betray Jesus. Dave, based on Psalm 109, I would have to say that Judas was in both groups. Many walked with Jesus and did not have a saving faith, but the faith of demons stated in James 2. Judas was part of that group. We can go on arguing back and forth, Dave. We may not arrive at any conclusions. Or maybe we could. But so far I have rebutted your every example and biblical misinterpretation.
John, what about Demas? He was carefully selected by Paul to assist him in the ministry. Paul would not have chosen a lost man.
I believe the passage you are referring to is 2 Timothy 4:10. For Demas hath forsaken me, having loved this present world, and is departed unto Thessalonica, Crescens to Galatia, Titus unto Dalmatia. First, does the Bible state that the apostles were gifted with the power to see men's hearts? The fact that Paul saw good qualities in Demas does not mean that Paul knew for sure that Demas was righteous. I believe that Demas was a believer. I do not argue that. The question is, who did Demas forsake? The verse does not state that Demas forsook Jesus. He forsook Paul. The verse also states that he loved this present world. Does the statement that Demas loved this present world mean that he became a partaker of worldly things? Or could it mean that he preferred comforts instead of the hardships of ministry? You see, Paul was in prison. Since Paul was in prison, the love of Demas for this present world has to be understood in light of the context. With Paul in prison, Demas may have preferred safety in Thessalonica rather than tribulation where Paul was. Demas had a choice to make. He either stayed with Paul and partook of Paul's circumstances, or he would leave Paul and partook of temporal benefits. Is it wrong for a believer to flee tribulation? Jesus himself told his disciples to flee when they saw the abomination of desolation. So fleeing for your life is not a sin. Was Demas unwilling to continue in the ministry? If not continuing in the ministry qualifies one as becoming unsaved, what about all those believers who do not work in the ministry? Are they lost? The context suggests that Demas preferred the advantage of fleeing for safety rather than suffering with Paul. The passage does not necessarily suggest that Demas was living worldly. Does that mean that Demas did not labor for the Lord? Perhaps. Does that mean that he stopped believing in Jesus? No.